I would like to bring to the stage Mr. Ned Dwyer.
Tough act to follow. I can't promise I'll be as funny as Shelley, but I'll probably be a little bit less offensive, hopefully. We are talking about democratization of research, so it could be a bit of a split crowd. And I'm actually missing my clicker. So yeah, my name is Ned. I'm co-founder and CEO of Great Question. We are the sponsor here today, but I promise this is not going to be a 20-minute ad for Great Question. But I will talk about it a little bit. For those that don't know, Great Question is a customer research platform. And our whole thing is, how can we help people have a single way to go and do all the things you need to do when you're trying to run research? So we combined a research CRM to make it easy to recruit the right people with all the mixed methods you'd need, like surveys and interviews and prototype tests, and then a research repository to store and share everything you're learning in one place. And so that's why folks like Amazon, ServiceNow, and fast growth companies like Canva, Asana, and Gusto use Great Question. But our mission is about democratizing research, and so that's why I'm really passionate about this. And so today I'm going to share a little bit about my kind of villain origin story, about why I've decided to go and focus on solving this problem. And so to back it up a little bit, this is actually 10 years ago now. I need to retire this story at some point. 10 years ago, we sold our first company to GoDaddy. We basically made it easy for web designers and developers to help small business owners to tweak their website. It was called Tweaky at the time, which is always a great name to talk about when you're going through customs. And so GoDaddy acquired us, and day one, they're like, what's your product strategy? How are you going to integrate your platform in with GoDaddy's ecosystem? And I was like, wait a minute, hold up a second. What problems do your customers have? And what problems do you think that we're going to solve for them? What right do we have to go and solve those problems? And I kind of got met with a lot of like blank stares. They had a UX research team, which was awesome. I'd never got a chance to work with a research team before, but they were too busy to work on my problem area. They had research tools, but they were too expensive and too restrictive to go and give me access to them. And so I was kind of on my own devices to go and recruit people and run my own research. And my best asset was a stack of Amazon gift cards that I would mail out on Fridays to people to say thanks for participating in research. I'm seeing some nodding faces, so maybe this is pretty familiar to everyone here. And so it was really laborious, took a lot of time. I could maybe do research studies once a quarter if I was lucky. And when I looked around, most people in the company weren't running research. They were relying on their gut instinct, which is often full of bias, or they were relying on the data, or they're relying on the highest paid person's opinion. And so I think that's kind of reflected somewhat in their products and their stock price, to throw a little bit of shade. And so this is ultimately what I call my villain origin story of where I became the democratizer, where I was dead set to go and make it so that anyone could actually run research at a drop of a hat. How can we make it so easy to run research that everyone does it? So that we can't have any excuses for not listening to our customers and solving their problems. And so before we get into it, I think it's important to talk about what actually is research democratization. Like, what are we even talking about? So maybe I'll get a show of hands here. Who here is familiar with the word research democratization? Okay, pretty good mix. Who here is for research democratization, as you understand it? And who is maybe against it or is like sort of questions it a little bit? Okay, got a few. That's great. So I think this is pretty representative when a lot of people are kind of for it. A bunch of people don't know what it really means and how it applies to them. And there's always going to be some people that maybe don't support it or don't support it under all circumstances. And so I think it's worthwhile like figuring out how to define it. And for me, I think research democratization is ultimately a spectrum. It starts with how likely are you to think that a product manager, as an example, should access feedback we're getting from customers, whether it's from like NPS or CSAT or something like that. I think most people would agree that that's probably a pretty positive use case and positive experience. The next step up would be, who thinks that a PM or a designer or a non-researcher should access insights produced by a researcher? Again, I think pretty controversial. We should democratize access to insights. And then what about the raw outputs? You know, they've run all these interviews. Can I go and scan through those? that maybe starts to get a bit more controversial because there's some interpretation that needs to happen there and some bias prevention. And then we get started into actually running research itself. And again, I think this is a spectrum too, where people are pretty happy for a designer to go and run an unmoderated prototype test. It's pretty contained, the methodology is pretty straightforward, you can train someone on a single method. But if we start talking about something like conjoint analysis or diary studies, like really kind of something where you might need to have some sort of academic background or some serious training, then understandably people get a little bit nervous, and I get that. But I think at the high level, I think that everyone should be for PMs, designers, and marketers, when they're making the millions of decisions that they need to make every day about the products they produce, having some sense of the customer at the heart of that decision. And because there's a million questions, there's only so many questions that a full-time researcher can actually answer. And so how do we go about informing those people to help them answer those questions with confidence? That's democratization. And so I think this is particularly important because the landscape for all our roles is getting so blurry, where we're sort of, the stack is getting collapsed. We talk about collapsing the research stack, so you don't need 12 different tools to understand your customers. But equally, I think it's happening in all of our roles, where we're moving from really specialized roles, where you could be a pure UI designer, or you could just be a product manager that's not doing design, that's not doing research, that's not doing development. But it's changing because technology is changing, and the expectations on people are also increasing. And so now, right now, we're currently hiring for a full stack product manager, as one example. And there's tons of applicants out there who are not only deeply experienced at product management, but now, thanks to AI tooling, they can get good enough at design, at prototyping, and actually at engineering to be able to deploy products into production to solve problems instead of relying on other members of the team. Are we going to use this for every use case? No. I doubt that someone at Google or Cloudflare is going to, vibe code their Terraform configuration or like some hardcore engineering problem, but it is getting easier to collapse parts of the stack. And so there's a question about when we bring this in. Like, when do we decide, how do we decide that something like conjoint analysis or a diary study maybe shouldn't be done by the product management intern? And I look at this framework, which is taken from Jeanette Ficella, who was at Pendo at the time, and is now at ServiceNow. And I think she took it from somewhere else, but I'll give her the credit. Where we sort of look at these two axes here. On one axis, we've got how well do we understand this problem? Is it a really clearly understood problem? And so here I think about things like heuristic analysis, like Nielsen Norman 10 usability heuristics. We understand that, look, a primary call to action button should probably be a different color than the secondary call to action. And maybe it should be reflective of the brand colors, and we probably also think about accessibility. Those things are pretty well understood. But on the unclear segment, we could say, look, all this new AI tooling is tending towards new pricing models. And one of those is usage-based pricing or value-based pricing. And it's really different than the traditional per-seat pricing. It's really unclear how we go about solving that. And then the other axis, we have risk. How high risk is this or low risk? And so a low risk thing would be, I want to change the button color, or I want to change the copy or make some sort of pretty minute change here. Coming back to usability testing, this is why I think we feel pretty comfortable with a designer doing a usability test on their own, because the problems are generally fairly well understood, but there's probably some nuance in the execution. But then we have something really high risk. High risk, we're going to change our business model from per seat pricing to usage-based pricing. That's kind of scary. We could lose a lot of money. We could piss a lot of people off. Everyone could be having a bad time. It's going to have a material impact on your ability to get paid. And so that's probably in the quadrant where we want to have a researcher involved. If only to sort of be overviewing this and probably running it because it's such an unclear problem, such high risk, and such a big impact on the business. But where it is low risk, we can either just ship it, or maybe we bring a product manager or a designer involved. But this, I don't think, goes far enough, because I think it misses three other areas of risk that we need to be assessing when we think about where we're going to democratize. And those are, first of all, the audience risk. And so I think about this particularly with like marginalized audiences, working with children, things like that. You probably want to take a bit more time and energy to think about the bias and the impact that you're going to have with those audiences. We shouldn't just go and run out there and let anyone go and run research with them. Equally, like, how visible is either the research itself or the output that we're going to produce? So I think about It's kind of a visibility, but it's also probably a reach question at Facebook. They kind of discourage product managers from talking directly with customers without a researcher present. And part of the reason is because they've got the rigor and the stage of company they're at. Part of the reason is a product manager can make a change that affects billions of people. And so equally, if we were doing something again with children, a sensitive topic, things like that, there's reputational stakes, that's probably a challenge. And then the final is whether it's a reversible or a reversible decision. So is it one-way or a two-way door? If we go and change our pricing model, you can maybe roll that back. Depends how you're planning on rolling it out. You're going to roll it out to everyone and make a big splash about it. One of our customers did this before we became a vendor to them, and they made this big splash and they had to go and walk it back. But not everyone got the walk back when they went and changed the pricing model. So some of these things are more sensitive. Because I think the reality is that every industry has these guardrails in place. These times when someone can and can't do something. And I often hear this complaint, which is, nobody's trying to democratize medicine. Why are we trying to do this to our industry, to researchers? And I'd say we actually are democratizing medicine. Probably not brain surgery. I think Elon might be trying to democratize brain surgery with his chip Neuralink thing. But nurse practitioners are out there doing all kinds of things. Pharmacists are giving out medicine over the counter and making decisions about who can get it, who can't get it. In engineering, we're seeing this so much, but not seeing more of this question asking research as a category, as a function. That why are we trying to democratize research? And I'd say it's not singling out. It's like every function is having these questions asked about who can and can't do this function. Oh, there we go. So there's this great quote from Dylan Field at Figma, and he talks about how do we lower the floor on who can go and do design while raising the ceiling on who it's possible to go and run design. And I love this quote because it's really about bringing everyone into the tent and saying, we've actually got a really large tent, we should all be here. And they're living this reality. There's a very large telecommunications company who I'm a customer of, and for some reason they have terrible coverage here in Silver Springs. And they have 6,000 Figma licenses, to give you some sense. Only 600 of them are actually designers. The rest are all sorts of other functions like marketers and engineers and all these other people that need to go and do design for various reasons. And we're doing the same thing for research at Great Question. And we think everyone should be embracing this as a mission, which is how do we lower the floor on who can actually do research and who can truly understand the customers to answer the millions of questions they've got every day about what they're trying to build, while raising the ceiling on what's possible for our most strategic of researchers. Because every industry needs governance tools. And so for us, it's things like pre-approving scripts and guardrails on incentives and who can talk to which audiences, because it isn't a free-for-all. You can decide that this PM intern can run research with these customers and not these other ones. They can use these methods and not these ones. They can share the results with these people. Maybe I'll come over here. And AI is enabling so much of this, which makes it so much easier for everyone to access this. And so I'll give an example of a case study we did with Flight Centre, which is a relatively unknown here. It's an incredible travel agency business out of Australia. They're everywhere. And you can go there and book flights and accommodation, things like that, and they're awesome. I think they've got about 3,000 employees around the world. And before they started working with us, they had 10 researchers, but really limited on the amount of research they could do. Research was happening, rogue research, where people would go out in the wild and go and talk to customers and state what have they learned as fact without necessarily a ton of rigor or oversight. But this research team was just getting absolutely worn out with the number of requests. They couldn't meet, especially all the exec requests, they just couldn't meet them. And so after, they went from 10 to 130 active users consuming research on a monthly basis, either consuming it or running it. They tripled the research volume they were able to put out, but it wasn't just tripling the volume, it was actually still producing it to a high standard, following established best practices with oversight from that research team on all the research that's being run. And it had a significantly greater impact. And so now the exec team, rather than having to go rogue to try and get answers to how customers think or the problems in the market, were actually able to put the customer at the center of those decisions. And they've seen a material increase in not only their product development processes, but if you can all look online, also in their share price, which I don't take too much credit for. And I think it's worth saying, though, all of this has to be built on the foundation of on the ethics side of things. Like, you can't escape things like consent and privacy and security and bias awareness and the rigor that really matches the risk that you're working on. That can't be skipped. And so I want to talk about how to go about doing this stuff, right? We've talked about why and the nuance of all this stuff, but I think this stuff is really important and it's relatively new because we've been talking about democratization for 10 years, 15, 20 years in the research category. But then like, how do the best people that are doing it the best actually go about enacting it? The first part is building a democratization charter. And so this is that, as we looked at the spectrum applies differently at different organizations. If you're a large financial services firm, you've got regulatory risk. If you're a healthcare firm, regulatory risk again. If you're building apps for kids under 13, there's all sorts of regulations on top of you. And so you need to decide who in your organization, given your context, can actually run the research. What methods can they run? With which audiences and for what purposes? It may just be that designers can do it. Maybe that no one can do it. It kind of really just depends on how rigorous your organization is. And the stage. You know, we're an early stage startup. We're 60 people now. And so we encourage everyone to be able to go and run research in different ways. But yeah, people that are newer to the organization, that haven't had training, don't have the context awareness, there's a few more barriers in place. And then we obviously have 2 researchers on team as well to help with some of the gnarliest, unclear problems that are high risk. And so I think figuring this out is a big part of deciding how structured or exclusive do you want this research to be run. You know, the top left, highly structured, highly exclusive, it's really just the PhDs that are going to be running the research. Versus a startup might be more on this like very distributed, allowing the front lines, PMs and designers, and anyone can do it at the drop of a hat. The second piece is assessing your research maturity. And actually, we actually just launched, this is more happenstance than an ad, but we just launched a research maturity framework. You can go and fill in a questionnaire and figure out where you sit on that. It's on my LinkedIn and on the Great Question LinkedIn. But I think we need to be thinking about like, where is your organization at? Where are the different people in your organization at as you try and standardize that throughput so you can trust all of the output that's coming out the back end. And so these are actually representatives of my cats. I have 3 cats, 2 kids, 3 cats. Barry, who's an absolute maniac. You would not trust him with your children. He's mostly an outside cat for very good reason. He can't be trusted. And then the next step up, we have Larry, who's more into, who's a bit more structured in scaling. And then Harry, the idea of getting somewhere where you've actually got research embedded into every single project and you're actually moving through the maturity. And none of my cats are now at the point of being more strategic in their approach to democratization. That's who Harry aspires to be, I think. And so assessing your research maturity is the next piece. And then finally, defining the guardrails. Now that you've got that organizational context, you understand what it is that you're dealing with, where the risks lie. You understand where the individuals in the team are. Now we can decide how much training do we require people before they can get in front of a customer? Which methods can they use? What are the guardrails we're going to set up, and how do we do that and enforce it and audit it to make sure that we're actually following these processes so we don't get ourselves into trouble? And so I hope what you'll take away from this, I know there are a lot of general democratization supporters here and people pretty well informed about it, but hopefully you learned something here today. But I think the biggest thing that I'm hoping that people walk away here from, aside from hopefully a newfound enthusiasm for democratization, which is what I try to do, is how are you going to go back to your organizations to make your business more customer-centric? How are you going to make it so these millions of decisions that get made every day are rooted in customer insights? So thank you. Thanks for the time.